Single mom collapses in a diner. She thinks it's exhaustion. But the quiet line cook who rushes to her side has secrets that run far deeper than anyone in town could guess. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The diner smelled like burnt coffee and fried bacon, comforting in a worn-out kind of way. Outside, a steady drizzle painted the world in gray, the clouds hanging low like they were too tired to snow. Jenna Brooke sat at the corner booth, elbows on the chipped table, fingers wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. She hadn't ordered anything but the cheapest cup of coffee, didn't need more, couldn't afford more. Her hands trembled slightly as she took another sip, blinking slow against the weight behind her eyes. Across the cracked vinyl seat, her 7-year-old son, Max, colored quietly on a paper placemat, tongue poking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. He didn't notice her swaying a little, didn't see her blink harder, trying to force the fog out of her mind. She hadn't slept, not really, not in days. Between the graveyard shift cleaning offices and the early morning waitressing job that barely covered rent, her body had learned how to function on fumes. But this morning something felt different, heavier, like her bones were tired. The diner buzzed around her, waitresses calling out orders, the grill sizzling behind the counter. No one paid her much attention. She liked it that way. Being invisible had its perks. Then the room tilted. At first, just a sway, like the ground was shifting under her boots. Jenna reached out instinctively, fingers grazing the table's edge. The mug tipped. Coffee spilled across the formica, seeping into Max's drawing. "Mom?" he said, voice uncertain. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her vision narrowed. Her heartbeat sounded like a slow drum in her ears. The air felt thick, syrupy, hard to breathe. She tried to stand, but her knees gave out before she could push off the bench. "Mom!" The crash of her body hitting the floor cut through the clatter of plates and silverware. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. Max scrambled from the booth, eyes wide with panic. From behind the counter, a figure moved, fast, quiet. The line cook. Tall, broad-shouldered, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. No hesitation, no panic, just a sharp look at the boy and a calm, steady presence dropping to Jenna's side. "Call an ambulance," he said, voice low and firm. No one in the diner had ever really noticed the cook before, but now every eye was on him. Eli Carter didn't move like most people. When others rushed in panic, he moved with purpose, silent, measured, like he'd done this before, because he had. Just not in places like diners with sticky floors and chipped coffee mugs. The moment the woman dropped, he was already stripping off his apron, sliding out from behind the line. Grease popped and hissed on the stove behind him, orders half-written hanging from the wheel, but none of it mattered. Not now. She was crumpled on the floor, legs tangled beneath her, face pale as bone. Her breathing was shallow but steady, eyes fluttering. Overexerted, dehydrated, maybe more. He crouched beside her, fingers moving to her wrist, checking the pulse with a familiarity that didn't match the setting. "She's going to be okay," he said, not to reassure himself, but the boy clinging to her jacket sleeve. Max. The name echoed in Eli's mind from a moment earlier when the kid had said it. Mom! Like the world might end if she didn't open her eyes. A waitress hovered nearby, wide-eyed. Should we call someone?" Eli didn't look up. "Already did?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Paramedics are on the way." "Good," he said, and returned his focus to the woman. Jenna. That was her name. He'd seen it on a check a few weeks back when she paid for toast and coffee with quarters and dimes. She always sat in the corner, always with the kid, always with that haunted, worn-down look people get when life hasn't let up in years. "You hear me?" he said gently, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. Her eyelids twitched. A faint nod. "You're okay. Just rest." The diner had gone quiet now. Even the regulars stopped chewing. Forks hovered above plates. No one knew what to say. They'd all seen Eli back there behind the grill, day in and day out, quiet as a shadow, But no one had seen this, how fast he'd moved, how calm he'd stayed, like he'd done it 100 times. When the paramedics arrived, Eli stepped back without a word, watched them load her onto the stretcher, watched the boy hold her hand like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. He didn't say goodbye, didn't ask questions, just turned and walked back to the kitchen, tied on his apron, and went back to the eggs like nothing had happened. But the whole diner knew something had. The hospital discharged her before the sun even had a chance to dip low in the sky. Exhaustion, the doctor said. Malnutrition, probably dehydration too. A quiet warning followed. Slow down, or your body will do it for you next time. Jenna nodded like she'd take the advice, but the truth was simple. Slowing down wasn't an option. Not when rent was due, not when Max needed food, not when the job at the cleaners barely kept the lights on. She clutched the thin discharge papers in one hand, Max's small fingers in the other, and stepped out into the wind. The chill hit harder now. Her jacket, 2 sizes too big and missing a button, did little to stop it. They stood on the curb while she tried to figure out what to do next. Her car was parked across town, still sitting behind the diner where it died 2 days ago. She could call someone, if she had someone to call. That's when she saw him again. Eli Carter stood beside a dented silver pickup truck that looked older than both of them combined. His hands were tucked into the pockets of a faded hoodie, and he watched her with the same unreadable expression he always wore. Not cold, not unkind, just distant. "I figured you might need a ride," he said, voice low and even. Jenna hesitated. Everything in her told her to say no. Pride, fear, that old bone-deep instinct that said, never trust what you don't understand. But Max looked up at her, his face pale and tired, and she knew she didn't have the strength to argue with herself today. She nodded. The drive was quiet. Eli didn't ask questions, didn't pry. Max nodded off in the back seat, his head resting against the window, mouth slightly open. Jenna stole glances at Eli as he drove, his hand steady on the wheel, his eyes always scanning the road. Not like a man who was just careful, like a man who was trained to be. It made her chest tighten, a strange cocktail of discomfort and safety. When they pulled up to her small apartment complex, she opened the door and paused. "Thank you," she said, the words almost foreign in her mouth. He gave a short nod. "Any time." She watched him drive off, taillights fading into the dusk. Something about him unsettled her, but not in the way bad men did. No, this was different. This was the kind of quiet that carried weight. By the time Jenna returned to the diner 3 days later, the whispers had already settled like dust in the corners of the place. Maple Hollow wasn't the kind of town where things stayed quiet, not even things as simple as a woman fainting over cold coffee. "Poor thing," murmured Bonnie, the waitress with too much blush and too many opinions, as she poured refills with one ear always tilted toward gossip, worked herself straight into the floor, with a kid no less. "Single mom, right?" a regular said from the corner stool. "Shame. She always looks like she's just barely holding on." Jenna pretended not to hear. She kept her head down, grateful the booth in the back was still empty. Max slid in first, already digging crayons out of his pocket. What really caught her attention, though, was how the tone shifted when Eli's name came up. "That cook," someone whispered low. "Eli?" He was the one who helped her, moved like he'd done it 100 times. "You see the way he handled her?" Bonnie leaned in. "You know he used to live up north, right? Rumor is he just showed up one day, took the job, barely spoke a word to anyone, doesn't drink, doesn't date, doesn't even go to church. That's not normal." "Maybe not," another voice chimed in, "but he's never done anyone harm. Quiet ain't the same as dangerous." Still, the air around his name crackled. People didn't know what to do with someone who didn't fit in the usual boxes, and Eli Carter didn't fit anywhere. From her booth, Jenna glanced toward the kitchen window. There he was, flipping hash browns like nothing had happened, as if he hadn't carried her unconscious body to the floor with the care of a man cradling something fragile, as if he hadn't driven her and Max home like it was nothing. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her, but something in her stomach shifted. Not nerves, not fear, just awareness. She sipped her coffee slowly, trying to pretend the eyes weren't on her. In Maple Hollow, secrets had a way of walking into the sunlight whether you invited them or not, and Jenna was beginning to realize that Eli Carter's shadow stretched longer than anyone knew. The envelope was thin, but heavy in a way only overdue notices could be. Jenna held it in her hands like it might burn her, standing in the middle of her kitchen with the hum of the old refrigerator and Max's quiet cough echoing through the silence. The rent was late again, not by much, just 10 days. But 10 days in Maple Hollow might as well be a lifetime. Her landlord, Mr. Derry, had always been polite, but even kindness had a limit when it came to money. She'd promised last month it wouldn't happen again, and here she was. The second job, cleaning medical offices downtown, paid under the table, which helped, but it meant late nights and early mornings. And her other shift, waitressing at a truck stop just off the interstate, barely covered groceries and Max's prescriptions. His asthma inhalers weren't cheap. She'd already cut them in half more times than she cared to admit. She pressed a hand to her forehead and leaned against the counter. The ache behind her eyes had settled in, deep, constant, like an unwelcome roommate. Rest wasn't even in the vocabulary anymore. It was survival now. Just get to next Friday. Just stretch the milk. Just keep Max breathing easy. He was curled up on the couch in the next room, wrapped in the blue and green knit blanket her mother had made before she passed. His chest rose and fell steadily, but she knew the sound, soft wheezing just beneath the breath. The air was cold in the apartment. Too cold. She hadn't turned the heat on that morning, hoping to save a few dollars. A knock at the door made her jump. When she opened it, there was no one there, just a plain brown paper bag sitting on the stoop. Inside were groceries, a bag of apples, pasta, a small box of cereal Max loved, and 2 inhaler cartridges, unopened, still sealed in their pharmacy packaging. No note, no name. But Jenna didn't have to wonder long. Her jaw tightened as she brought the bag inside. Gratitude and resentment twisted in her stomach. She knew it was Eli, knew it with the same certainty that she knew pride was the only thing keeping her upright most days. She stared at the inhalers in her hand. Help, offered so quietly, it hurt. And still, she wasn't sure if she could accept it. It was almost dark when the knock came, 3 soft raps, barely loud enough to rise above the hum of the radiator and the cartoon murmuring from the old TV. Jenna peeked through the peephole out of instinct, though she already had a feeling who it would be. Eli stood there, holding a plastic takeout container wrapped in foil. No smile, no explanation on his face, just that same quiet presence, like he belonged to a world where words were optional. She opened the door halfway. "Something wrong?" He shook his head once. "We had extra at the diner. Thought Max might want something warm." She looked at the container. It was heavier than it looked. She could smell roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and something rich and buttery beneath the foil, the kind of meal she hadn't cooked in weeks. "He's already eaten," she said, though it wasn't exactly true. Max had picked at a bowl of microwaved soup and some dry toast. Eli gave a slow nod, not pressing. "No problem." He turned to leave. "Wait," she said, her voice catching. She hadn't meant to stop him, but the words came anyway. "Thank you." He didn't turn around, just lifted a hand in a small wave as he walked down the steps and into the fading light. Inside, Max perked up as soon as he saw the food. "Is that for me?" Jenna hesitated. Then she smiled, setting the container on the table. "Yeah, baby, it's for you." He dove in with the enthusiasm only a kid could muster. The first real meal he'd had in days, disappearing quickly between grateful bites. Jenna sat across from him, watching the tension ease from his tiny shoulders, and for a moment, just one, the weight pressing down on her, lightened. That night, she returned the container, left it on the diner's back doorstep after her shift, cleaned and neatly wrapped in a paper towel with a note tucked inside. "Thank you, but we're okay." The next evening, a different dish arrived. Spaghetti and meatballs. No note this time, no knock. Just a warm container waiting on her doorstep like a promise. It became a rhythm. Quiet gestures passed in silence. No questions asked. No thanks demanded. Jenna didn't know what to call it yet, but it felt like the beginning of something she'd almost forgotten how to believe in. The first time she really noticed it was at the grocery store. Jenna stood in the cereal aisle, Max bouncing beside her, begging for the brand with the cartoon bear on the front. She was weighing coupons against shelf prices when she caught sight of Eli at the end of the aisle, half-shadowed behind a display of soup cans. He wasn't watching her, not directly, but his eyes weren't wandering either. They were focused, quiet, alert, like he wasn't shopping, like he was scanning. She waved without thinking, a soft smile lifting the corner of her mouth. He gave her a polite nod before slipping into the next aisle. A simple moment, but something stuck. That night, when he dropped off another container, this one packed with beef stew and cornbread, she watched him walk away from her porch just to see how he moved. Not fast, not stiff, but deliberate, like a man who was used to measuring every step. In the diner, she started catching more of it, how Eli always sat facing the door during his short breaks, how his eyes flicked up every time a customer raised their voice, even if it was just about cold coffee, how his shoulders stayed loose, but his hands never really strayed far from the edge of the counter, like he needed to be ready. For what? She didn't know. She asked Bonnie about him once, casual, like she wasn't actually curious. "He's quiet," Bonnie said, shrugging as she filled a salt shaker. "Polite, never causes trouble," but she leaned in a little. "You ever notice the way he looks at people? Not like he's judging them, just reading them. Makes you wonder what he's seen." Jenna did wonder, more and more, because when Eli looked at her now, there was something behind his gaze that made her feel oddly safe, and that terrified her. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't pity. It was sharper than that, protective, steady, like he was watching for threats she didn't even know existed. And every time their eyes met, she got the strangest feeling, like he knew how to disappear, how to fight, and how to bury things deep. And like maybe, just maybe, he was doing all of that for her. The car didn't belong there. It was a black sedan, engine idling low, parked just across the street from Jenna's apartment building. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, and it hadn't moved in the 20 minutes since she'd first noticed it from the kitchen window. Jenna stood behind the curtain, arms folded tight across her chest, her heart beginning to thud in that quiet, bone-deep way that only mothers know. Max was asleep in the next room, a soft wheeze in his breath that came and went with the cold. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe someone was just lost or on the phone, but her gut said otherwise. She double-checked the front lock, then turned off the lights so whoever was in the car couldn't see in. Every part of her felt wired, like her skin could hear the hum of that engine from across the street. 10 more minutes passed. The car still hadn't moved. And then a knock, not from the front door, from the back. Jenna froze. Her breath caught. Another knock, soft, careful. She crept to the back door, heart in her throat, and peeked through the small window. "Eli!" She opened the door just a crack. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. He didn't look surprised, or hurried, just steady, as always. "Was heading home from the diner. Thought I'd check in, see how Max was doing." Her eyes narrowed. "You never just check in." His jaw tensed slightly. He glanced toward the front of the building. "Saw a car sitting out front. Been there a while." "You saw it?" she asked. "Yeah." He looked at her then, and there was something in his eyes that made her throat tighten. "That why your lights are off?" She nodded slowly. Eli's voice dropped even lower. "You want me to handle it?" The question wasn't casual, and it wasn't a joke. It hung there between them like a loaded weapon. "No," she whispered, "not yet." He nodded once, stepped back. "Keep the doors locked. I'll stick around a bit." She wanted to ask why he knew how to be this calm, why he didn't seem afraid of anything, but instead she just said, "Thank you." And in the dim porch light, for just a moment, he looked like a man who'd waited his whole life to be useful again. The smell of frying bacon clung to Jenna's clothes before she even stepped through the diner's front door. It was the familiar kind of greasy scent that somehow made a place feel warm, even if it was the kind of warmth that came with sore feet and minimum wage. She was there to pick up Max's scarf. He'd dropped it after breakfast the morning before, just a quick stop, in and out. But then Tom, the owner, waved her over from behind the counter. "Got a minute, Jenna?" She hesitated. "Sure." Tom was a round man with a gray beard and a perpetually furrowed brow, but he had kind eyes, the kind that made it hard to tell when he was about to say something generous or something difficult. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and motioned for her to sit on one of the stools. "I heard about what happened the other morning," he said gently. "That you collapsed." She stiffened. "I'm fine." He nodded, not pressing. "I figured as much. Still, I wanted to offer you something." He glanced toward the kitchen. "I've got a shift open. Mornings, just part-time, 2 or 3 days a week to start. Not glamorous, but steady." Jenna blinked. "What? You've worked food service before, haven't you?" "Yes, but why are you offering me a job?" Tom shrugged. "You're sharp and reliable, and I need help." She narrowed her eyes, sensing something under the surface. "Did Eli say something?" Tom didn't answer right away. "He mentioned you've got a kid, that you're a hard worker. Said you deserved a shot if one came along." Jenna looked down at her hands. She hadn't asked for this. She'd made it clear she could handle her own messes, and yet here it was, a lifeline offered in a way that didn't feel like charity, just an open door. "I don't want special treatment," she said quietly. "You're not getting it," Tom replied. "You're getting a chance. Whether or not you take it is up to you." She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll take the shift." And as she walked out, scarf in hand, job offer in pocket, she couldn't help but glance toward the kitchen window. Eli wasn't looking at her, but she knew he knew. And somehow that made all the difference. The envelope came on a Tuesday, tucked between a coupon flyer and a late notice from the power company. No return address, just her name in sharp-typed letters that looked sterile against the worn paper. Jenna knew what it was before she opened it. Inside, a statement from St. Vincent's Clinic, Max's last asthma visit, past due, final notice. The number printed in bold at the bottom wasn't massive, but it was enough to send her heart spiraling, enough to drain the color from her already pale face. She sank onto the edge of the couch, the envelope clutched in her trembling hands. Max was in the other room, humming to himself as he built towers from mismatched blocks. The sound, so innocent, so unaware, made something inside her snap. Tears came quickly. Not the quiet kind either. The kind that racked her shoulders and soaked her sleeves. She bit her lip to keep from sobbing aloud, but it was no use. She'd stretched every penny, skipped meals, walked instead of taking the bus. And it still wasn't enough. Always not enough. She wasn't crying over a number. She was crying because her son was sick, and she couldn't give him what he needed, because she'd tried so hard to keep it together, to be strong, to be fine, and the weight had finally won. When she stepped out to get the mail the next morning, her eyes were still puffy, and she hadn't bothered with makeup. She didn't expect anything good, just more pressure stuffed into white envelopes. But there it was, plain, unmarked. An envelope tucked in the back of her mailbox, like someone didn't want it to be seen. Inside, 5 crisp $100 bills, folded tight, no note, no name. She stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, staring down at the money like it might disappear. Her first instinct was to reject it, return it somehow, but there was nowhere to return it to. And part of her already knew who had left it. She looked up the street toward the diner. She didn't cry this time, didn't smile either. She just pressed the envelope to her chest, breathed in the cold air, and walked back inside with one thought echoing in her mind. Why does a man like Eli Carter know so much about disappearing and about saving people who don't want to be saved? The first shift started before dawn. The kind of cold that seeped through gloves clung to the edges of the diner windows, frosting the corners as if warning the day not to come too quickly. Jenna arrived with her hair pulled back and her pride steeled, determined to prove she belonged. No handouts, no favors. Inside, the kitchen was already alive. The heat from the flat-top stove fogged the air, and Eli stood at his usual post, clean apron, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on the prep board like it might speak. He nodded when she came in, nothing more. No small talk, no mention of the envelope. Jenna was grateful. Tom handed her a notepad and pointed her toward the register and counter, but when the morning rush began to swell, Jenna drifted toward the back. Unspoken permission seemed to pass between Eli and her, and she started slicing tomatoes beside him, quiet and focused. That's when she noticed. It wasn't just that Eli was good in the kitchen, it was how he moved, precise, efficient, controlled. Every slice the same width, every motion purposeful. The way he held a knife wasn't casual, not even instinctive. It was trained, practiced, like muscle memory, born from something more than chopping vegetables. "Did you go to culinary school or something?" she asked, only half joking. Eli paused for a moment, just one beat too long. "Not exactly." She raised an eyebrow. "Well, you cut like a machine." He didn't respond right away, just wiped down the board and switched to onions. "Discipline," he said finally, voice low over the sizzle of bacon on the grill. "It stays with you, even when the reasons behind it don't." That made her pause. She wanted to ask more, but something in his tone told her not to. Instead, she watched his hands move, quick, steady, never wasting time or motion. Not just skillful, dangerous even, in a way she couldn't explain. And yet he handed her the knife next, showing her the grip, the rhythm, the way to let the blade do the work. No smile, no ego, just quiet guidance. That morning, she didn't just learn how to hold a knife. She started to understand what it meant to stand beside a man who knew how to use one. The plastic shell was cracked clean down the middle. Max held it in both hands like something sacred, lip quivering, eyes wide with quiet panic. His inhaler case, cheap, blue and shaped like a dinosaur, had snapped when it slipped from his coat pocket on the school steps. Jenna found him sitting on the floor beside it, small fingers trembling too hard to pick up the pieces. "It still works," he whispered, though his voice betrayed him. "It's just the outside. I can still use it." Jenna crouched beside him, brushing hair from his forehead. "I know, sweetheart. We'll figure something out." But Max didn't look convinced. That little plastic case wasn't just protection for his inhaler. It was armor. Familiar. Safe. In a world where his lungs could betray him any second, it gave him control. And now it was broken. That evening, Eli stopped by the apartment with another warm container, this time shepherd's pie, and noticed Max sitting unusually quiet on the couch, holding the broken pieces in his lap. "What happened?" he asked Jenna, nodding toward the boy. She told him, just the basics. His case broke. He's upset. No big deal. Eli nodded once, then turned to Max. "Can I see it?" Max looked up, hesitant, but handed it over. Eli turned the pieces over in his hands, fingers tracing the crack, measuring. "You mind if I borrow this overnight?" Max glanced at Jenna, unsure. "It's okay," she said softly. "Just for tonight." The next day, Eli showed up just as Jenna and Max were heading out the door. He held out the dinosaur case, good as new, glued and sealed, reinforced with a layer of clear resin. But he didn't stop there. He'd etched Max's initials into the side in small, neat letters, and added a loop to clip it to a backpack zipper. Max stared at it like Eli had just handed him treasure. Then he smiled. Not the shy, forced one Jenna usually saw around strangers. This one was real, bright and unguarded. "Thanks," he said, voice soft but sure. Eli gave a small nod. "You're welcome." And for the first time, Max didn't turn away after the exchange. He stayed close. Asked Eli what tools he used, if he could fix other things, if maybe he could show him sometime. Jenna watched from the doorway, her throat tightening. Max didn't do this with men, not ever. But with Eli, something was different. With Eli, Max felt safe enough to smile. It started as a simple restock. The kitchen rush had ended, leaving behind the usual mess, half-empty bins of flour, tomato sauce smudged across the counters, the clatter of dishes echoing from the sink. Jenna was elbow-deep in reorganizing the back pantry, grateful for the quiet. The air smelled of old spices and industrial cleaner, and she moved with practiced efficiency, hands sorting cans and boxes while her mind wandered elsewhere. She reached up to shift a dusty crate of bulk coffee when she saw it. Tucked behind a stack of old cutting boards, half obscured by a stained apron, was a metal box. Dark gray, heavy-looking. The kind with a clasp lock on the front. The kind that didn't belong in a pantry next to powdered sugar and paper towels. She knelt and pulled it forward, noticing the faint lettering scrawled on the lid in black marker. Just a single letter, C. Her fingers brushed the lock, no rattling inside, no sign of a key nearby. It wasn't labeled for inventory. It wasn't part of any order she'd seen. "Jenna?" The voice stopped, her hand cold. She turned and found Eli standing in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. Not angry exactly, but alert, sharper than she'd ever seen him in the kitchen. She stood slowly. "I was just reorganizing. Found this. Didn't mean to—" "Don't touch that," he said, quiet but firm. Something in his tone shut down any instinct she had to ask why. It wasn't just a request. It was a line. One he didn't want crossed. Jenna straightened, brushing off her hands. "It's yours?" He gave a single nod. "What's in it?" she asked before she could stop herself. He held her gaze for a beat too long, then said simply, "Nothing that concerns the diner." She almost asked again, almost pressed. But something about the way he stood, the tension in his shoulders, the weight behind his silence, told her not to. "All right," she said, stepping away. "Didn't mean to pry." He relaxed just slightly. "Thanks." She left the pantry with the image of that box burned into her mind. It wasn't just storage. And Eli Carter didn't strike her as the kind of man who labeled things casually. See, not for kitchen, not for coffee. For something else entirely. The sky had turned the color of steel by the time Jenna finished closing up. The last customers were gone, the booths wiped down, and the floors swept clean. The hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the wall clock were the only sounds that lingered. Tom had left hours ago, Bonnie too. But Eli, as usual, stayed behind, finishing the deep clean in the kitchen, silent as ever. Jenna stepped out the back door into the cool night air, taking a moment to breathe. It had been a long shift, the kind that sank deep into your bones. She leaned against the brick wall, rubbing her hands together for warmth. That's when she saw him. Eli sat on a low wooden crate near the alley, his back to her. The glow of the back porch light cast a soft circle around him. He hadn't noticed her yet, or maybe he had, and just didn't care. In his hands was a small, worn photo. The edges curled, the paper yellowed by time and sun. Two men stood side by side in the picture. Both wore camouflage, the heavy kind made for places that didn't have roads. Desert behind them. One was grinning wide, full of life. The other, Eli, looked just the same as he did now, stoic, watchful, but younger. She stepped closer, slowly. "That him?" she asked softly. Eli didn't jump, didn't even flinch. He just looked down at the photo a second longer before slipping it into his jacket pocket. "Yeah." His voice was quieter than usual. "Name was Caleb." Jenna didn't ask how he died. She could hear it in Eli's voice. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the way he blinked slower, like memory physically hurt. "What happened?" she asked anyway, gently. Eli looked up at the sky like it might give him the words he didn't want to say. "He saved me. I didn't save him." It was the first thing she'd heard from him that felt like it cracked the surface of whatever he carried. Jenna didn't reply. She just sat down beside him on the cold concrete, the silence stretching between them like an old scar. And for the first time, Eli let it stay. The diner was half full, the usual lull between the breakfast and lunch crowds. Jenna moved behind the counter, refilling coffee and jotting down orders, her apron streaked with flour and syrup. The old jukebox in the corner played something soft and twangy, a familiar hum that usually made the place feel warm, but not today. The man sat alone at the end booth. He wasn't from Maple Hollow, that much was clear. His coat was too new, his sunglasses didn't come off even indoors, and he had the restless energy of someone used to getting his way. At first he was just short with her, impatient, tapping his fingers against the table when his coffee wasn't hot enough, complaining that the eggs were overdone. But Jenna had been in customer service long enough to let things slide. Until he grabbed her wrist. She hadn't seen it coming. One second she was clearing his plate, the next his hand was wrapped around her arm, firm and possessive. "I said decaf, sweetheart," he sneered, his voice low and mocking. "You trying to give me a heart attack?" Jenna froze. The mug in her other hand shook slightly, coffee sloshing onto the tray. "I'll get you another," she said, steadying her voice. But he didn't let go, just tightened his grip a little more. That's when the air shifted. Eli moved before anyone could blink. One second he was behind the pass, wiping down the prep board. The next he was at the booth, his hand clamped around the man's wrist with a grip that made Jenna's breath catch. "Let go," Eli said, calm and low. The man turned, cocky, until he looked up and really saw him, saw the eyes, the posture, the stillness that didn't belong to a cook. He let go, but Eli didn't. He leaned in close, voice so soft it didn't carry past the booth. "If you ever touch her, or anyone, like that again, I will break something you can't walk away from." The man pulled back his hand like it had been burned. Eli straightened slowly, gaze locked, and returned to the kitchen without another word. The diner buzzed with a nervous silence. Jenna stood there, her pulse thudding in her ears. The customer didn't finish his coffee. He left a crumpled bill on the table and walked out fast, almost tripping on the door. She turned to the kitchen window, where Eli was already back to chopping onions, as if nothing had happened. But something had. Everyone had seen it. And Jenna couldn't stop thinking about how controlled that rage had been, how dangerous it could be if he ever let it slip. The diner lights had long since gone out, but Jenna couldn't sleep. The apartment was quiet, Max tucked safely in bed, his soft breathing a steady rhythm in the background. But Jenna's mind was a storm. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that man's hand wrapped around her wrist, and Eli's even tighter grip clamped down on his. Not out of panic, not out of impulse, out of calculation. That kind of force didn't come from self-defense classes or adrenaline. It came from training, from experience, from something darker. She grabbed her coat and slipped out the door, following instinct more than reason. It was late, but she knew where to find him. The diner's back lot was empty, except for the old truck parked in its usual spot. Eli sat on the loading dock, legs stretched out, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He didn't smoke often, only when the night was too loud for silence to soothe. He saw her coming but didn't move, just looked at her like he knew this was coming. She stopped a few feet away. "You're not just a cook." A beat passed. "No," he said simply. She folded her arms. "So what were you?" He let the cigarette hang from his lips, took one last drag, and crushed it beneath his boot. "Army? Special Forces." The words hung heavy in the air. "Is that what the C stands for? In the box?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "I saw the way you handled that guy today," she said. "That wasn't about me. That was instinct. Control. You weren't scared. You were ready." Eli looked down at his hands, rubbing his thumb over a scar on his knuckle. "I used to be the guy they called when things got bad. Really bad. Did some good. Did some things I don't talk about." Jenna's throat tightened. "And now you're cooking eggs in a town no one's heard of." He finally looked up. "Because I lost someone, and I didn't want to keep losing pieces of myself." They sat in silence for a long while, the cold creeping in around them. "Why help me?" she asked. Eli's eyes met hers, clear and unflinching. "Because you needed it, and because Max reminded me of someone I couldn't save." Her breath caught, not from fear but from the truth in his voice, the weight of it, the grief that never left. "I don't need protection," she said softly. "I know," he replied, "but that doesn't mean I won't give it anyway." And for the first time, she didn't push him away. The next night they met again on the diner's back steps, as if the conversation had never really ended. Eli sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely, staring at the gravel as though it might rearrange itself into something easier to look at. Jenna leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, waiting, not pushing, not rushing, just waiting. He spoke without being asked. "Afghanistan, 2009. His voice was even, but there was a rawness to it, like every word came with splinters. "We were on a recon mission, supposed to be routine. We were watching a compound. Intel said it was quiet, nothing unusual." He paused, took a slow breath. "It wasn't quiet. It was a trap." Jenna didn't move. "There were 4 of us," Eli continued. "Me, my best friend Caleb, and 2 other guys. They hit us hard. RPGs, snipers, like they knew we were coming. We tried to pull back, but Caleb, he got hit, chest, close range." He looked up, eyes not quite meeting hers. "I carried him 2 miles through the dark. Thought if I got him back to the med tent in time, I could still save him. I couldn't." Jenna's heart cracked open at the edges. She didn't speak, just listened. "After that, I did a few more tours, but something in me shifted. I wasn't sleeping. I couldn't look people in the eye. Eventually, they said I could take a desk job, teach new recruits, whatever. I said no. I walked away." He leaned back against the cold brick wall, letting his head rest there. "I drove for days, picked a place off the map, saw the help wanted sign at the diner and took the job. Figured cooking was quiet, safe. No one asks questions when you make a good omelet." Jenna stepped forward, kneeling beside him, her voice gentle. "Why did you tell me all this now?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because I think you deserve the truth, and because I think you've been carrying things too heavy for too long, just like I have." The silence between them was deep and still, not empty, shared. Jenna reached for his hand, and for the first time since the war, Eli let someone hold a piece of his past without pulling away. The next morning, Jenna couldn't meet his eyes. She showed up to her shift on time, apron tied, hair pulled back, smile in place, but something was different, quieter, colder, like a window had been cracked open during the night, and all the warmth had drifted out. Eli felt it before she even said a word. The space between them wasn't hostile, but it was careful, polite, like a room filled with invisible glass you didn't want to break. He handed her the prep list. She took it without a glance. They worked side by side as always, chopping, cooking, refilling the fryer. But there was no banter today, no shared glances, no casual brush of shoulders. Jenna kept her focus on the work, but he could see it in her hands, the tension in her grip, the way she wiped her palms on her apron too often. Finally, he said it, soft. "You're pulling away." She paused over the tomatoes. Her knife hovered mid-air. "I don't know what you want me to say," she replied, not looking at him. "Just the truth," Eli said. She set the knife down and turned toward him, jaw clenched. "You tell me you were trained to kill people, that you've lived through things I can't even imagine, and I'm supposed to just pretend that doesn't scare me?" Eli didn't flinch. "I never asked you to pretend." Jenna shook her head, stepping back. "You're good to Max. You're good to me. But Eli, When you looked at that man in the booth, you didn't just defend me, you became someone else, someone I don't recognize, and I've spent my whole life trying to keep dangerous men out of Max's world." Her voice cracked at the edges, and she hated herself for it. "I don't want to be afraid of you," she whispered, "but part of me is, because if you can do that to protect me, what happens when the rage isn't pointed in the right direction?" Eli stood still, calm, as always. "I don't lose control," he said. "Not anymore." "But I don't know that," she replied. "Not really." She turned before he could answer, disappearing through the swinging door into the front of the diner, the bell above it chiming in her wake. And Eli stood alone in the kitchen, a quiet ache settling in his chest, one he hadn't felt in years. It was folded neatly inside her mailbox. No envelope, no return address, just a single sheet of paper, creased once down the middle, waiting like it had been placed there by hand. Jenna almost didn't see it. She'd gone to check the mail with Max's hand in hers, laughing at something he said about dinosaurs and chocolate milk. The moment felt normal, light, the kind of moment she clung to. But then she unfolded the paper. Her heart stopped mid-beat. "You thought you could hide. Cute, I know where you are now, and I'm coming for what's mine." T. Just that. No signature, but she didn't need one. The sharp, blocky letters, the smug tone, the cold finality in that last line. Tyler, Max's father. She felt her knees weaken. Max tugged her hand. "Mom?" She blinked, forcing herself to crumple the paper and shove it into her coat pocket. "Let's go inside, baby." She locked the door behind them twice. Inside, Jenna tried to breathe, but every inhale felt thin and tight. Her hands shook as she made Max a sandwich, nodding along to his stories, pretending like her world hadn't just tilted back toward a nightmare she thought she'd escaped. Tyler had never hit Max, not yet. But he had screamed, thrown things, broken furniture like it was made of paper. He'd called Max soft, weak, said real men didn't cry. The night Jenna left, Max had been hiding in the closet, arms over his head, whispering, "Is it my fault?" It had taken every ounce of courage she had to leave. She'd changed states, taken jobs that paid pennies, lived small, careful, invisible, and now somehow he'd found her. Later that night, after Max was asleep, Jenna sat on the couch in the dark with the letter clutched in her lap. Her phone sat on the table beside her, Eli's number glowing on the screen. She stared at it for a long time. Her thumb hovered. She wanted to believe she could handle this on her own, that she didn't need to lean on anyone, especially not him. But the truth was brutal in its simplicity. She was scared, and she didn't know how to keep Max safe alone. The first nightmare came 2 nights after the letter. Jenna woke to the sound of muffled crying, soft and sharp, like someone trying not to be heard. She shot upright, heart racing before her feet even touched the floor. The clock blinked 3:12 a.m. in dull red light. She was already moving. Max's door was cracked open. Inside, he was curled in the corner of his bed, blankets bunched in a tight knot around him, fists clenched in his pajama top. "Max?" she whispered, rushing to his side. His eyes were wide open but unfocused, caught somewhere between sleep and memory. "He's here," Max whispered. "I heard him. He was yelling. He said he was going to take me away." Jenna's heart dropped into her stomach. She gathered him into her arms, cradling him close, rocking slowly the way she used to when he was a baby and colic ruled their nights. "No one's taking you anywhere," she murmured over and over. "I've got you. I've got you." He didn't fall back asleep for a long time. Neither did she. The next morning, Max barely spoke. He dragged his feet, wouldn't eat his cereal, kept glancing toward the front door like it might open on its own. The circles under his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen. At school drop-off, he clung to her longer than usual. "Promise I won't have to go with him," he said quietly. Jenna felt the sting in her chest. "I promise, baby." But when she got back to the apartment, she didn't go inside. She sat in her car, staring blankly at the dashboard, the weight of everything pressing down like concrete. She couldn't do this alone anymore, not with Max waking up crying, not with her own hands shaking every time she passed the front window, not with the letter burned into her memory like a brand. She pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over Eli's number again, just like it had before. This time, she pressed it, let it ring. When his voice answered, low, calm, exactly what she needed, she didn't try to sound strong. "Eli," she said, her voice cracking, "I need help." The knock on the door came just after sunset. Jenna didn't flinch this time. She'd been expecting it. She opened it to find Eli standing on the porch, hands in his coat pockets, the usual stillness about him, like the chaos of the world never touched him unless he let it. She stepped aside. "Come in." He crossed the threshold without a word, his eyes sweeping the room out of instinct. Front door, back door, windows, corners. Not paranoid, trained. She didn't even pretend not to notice anymore. Max was asleep in his room, after another nightmare. "I'm not going to pretend anymore," Jenna said, her voice low but steady. "He's coming, and I don't know what I'll do if he shows up." Eli said nothing at first, just watched her, but not in judgment, in readiness. "I don't want to run again," she added, the words sticking in her throat. "I'm tired of running. I want to protect Max. I have to protect him, but—" Her hands trembled slightly. "I need help. I need you." There was no hesitation in Eli's face, no shift in posture, just a slow, deliberate nod. "I'll stay close," he said, "as long as it takes." Jenna swallowed hard. "What does that mean?" "It means I'll walk Max to school. I'll be outside the diner when your shift ends. I'll sleep in the truck if I have to. If he shows up, I'll know before he gets near your door." The weight of that promise settled into the room like gravity. Jenna sank onto the couch, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this?" Eli knelt down in front of her, not too close, but close enough. His voice was quiet, unwavering. "Because Max deserves to sleep without fear, and because you deserve someone in your corner who doesn't walk away." Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. "You're not scared?" she asked. "I've faced worse men than him," Eli said, "but I've never cared more about the outcome." Jenna let the silence settle between them, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. They started in the living room. Max was at school, the curtains were drawn, and the furniture had been pushed back against the walls. Jenna stood barefoot on the worn rug, her posture stiff, arms crossed over a faded sweatshirt. Eli stood across from her, his hands open, calm, patient, like this was just another recipe he was teaching her. "This isn't about being strong," he said. "It's about being smart, fast, controlled." Jenna nodded, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "I haven't thrown a punch in my life." "Good," he said. "You'll learn to do it right." He started with the basics: how to stand, how to shift her weight, how to throw her weight without losing balance. He showed her how to break a grip, how to jab quickly and pull back, how to stay on her feet when someone came at her hard. Over and over she practiced. His voice never rose, his hands never faltered. At first she was all hesitance, movements too gentle, shoulders too tight. But Eli had a way of explaining things that cut through fear, like he was giving her instructions for fixing a leak, not fighting a man who wanted to take her son. "Again," he said. After her fifth attempt to break his wrist hold, she exhaled sharply, tried again, this time cleaner, faster. "You're getting it." Jenna looked up, breathless, hair falling from her ponytail. "I don't want to hurt anyone." "You're not learning to hurt," Eli said. "You're learning to survive. There's a difference." That landed somewhere deep. She nodded. Later, they moved to improvised weapons, how to use keys, a pen, a cast-iron skillet if needed. He taught her how to control her breathing, how to listen to instinct, how to trust it. "You already know how to fight, Jenna," he said. eyes meeting hers. "You've been doing it every day, just in silence. This just gives you another kind of power." And she felt it. By the end of the week, her punches were sharper, her voice steadier. She looked in the mirror and didn't just see a tired single mom anymore. She saw someone ready, someone who would never again wait to be rescued, someone who had learned what it meant to fight on her own terms. The storm rolled in faster than anyone expected. One minute the sky was just overcast. The next, it was a curtain of white swallowing the streets. By early evening, power lines were icing over, visibility was near zero, and every sensible person in Maple Hollow was hunkered down indoors with extra blankets and flickering candles. Eli had been walking Max home from school when the snow started. By the time they reached Jenna's apartment, the wind was howling like something alive. Going back out wasn't an option, so he stayed. Jenna lit every candle she could find, lined the windows with towels to keep the cold from creeping in. The power flickered twice before finally giving up for good, and the apartment sank into that strange kind of hush only snowstorms bring. The world outside muffled, time slowed. They all ended up in the living room, wrapped in blankets, the glow of a few battery-powered lanterns casting soft shadows across the walls. Max sat between them, contentedly sipping cocoa Eli had somehow managed to make warm on the stovetop before the power gave out. For the first time in weeks, Jenna let herself breathe. They played cards by candlelight. Go fish, mostly, because it made Max laugh. Eli let himself lose a few hands, his poker face still perfect, even when Max accused him of hiding all the sevens. Later, Max fell asleep in a bundle of pillows and fleece, his head on Eli's knee. Jenna sat across from them, legs tucked under her, watching the quiet rise and fall of her son's breath. "He trusts you," she said softly. Eli looked down at the boy, his hand resting gently on Max's back. "I know. You don't let people in easily," she added, "but with him, you just did." Eli met her gaze across the dim room, because he needed someone who wouldn't leave. Something cracked inside her then, not broken, but open. She moved closer, sitting beside him. They didn't touch, not yet. But their shoulders brushed, and it felt like something quietly shifting. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the apartment there was warmth, not just from the blankets or the cocoa or the shared laughter, from the feeling, fragile but growing, that maybe they weren't just surviving anymore. Maybe, just maybe, they were starting to live. The storm hadn't let up by morning. The world outside was buried in white, rooftops and streets softened under the thick, undisturbed snow. Inside the apartment the air was still and quiet, warm enough under blankets, but hushed in a way that made every breath feel louder. Max was still asleep, curled beneath layers on the couch, his cheeks pink from the cold. Jenna stood at the window, hands wrapped around a steaming mug of instant coffee, watching snowflakes spiral past the glass like pieces of ash. Eli stood beside her, close but not touching. He'd been there most of the night, awake while she drifted in and out beside Max. Always watchful, always quiet. For a long while they said nothing, the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. "Hard to believe it's the same world out there," Jenna murmured. "Looks peaceful, like nothing bad could ever happen." Eli's voice was low. "That's the lie snow tells." She looked at him then, really looked. His eyes were soft in the morning light, not guarded like they so often were. For once, the weight he carried didn't seem so heavy. It just seemed human. "You're different when it's quiet," she said. He turned his gaze toward the window again. "I spent a long time getting used to noise. Quiet used to feel dangerous. Now it feels earned." She smiled faintly. "I think we're both still unlearning things." Another pause, another breath. She reached for his hand. It wasn't a grand gesture, just her fingers slipping into his, slow and uncertain, but sure. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. His hand closed around hers gently, like he wasn't sure he deserved to hold it. When she turned toward him, their faces were close. She didn't lean in, neither of them did. It just happened. The space closed, the breath stilled, and then the kiss was soft, barely more than a whisper. A question asked, not answered. But before it deepened, Eli pulled back. Not abruptly, not coldly, just enough to breathe again. His eyes searched hers, pain flickering beneath the quiet. "I don't want to break anything," he said, voice thick. "Especially not you." Jenna reached up, brushed a thumb across his jaw. "Then don't." But he was already stepping back, creating that careful space again. Not out of rejection, but out of fear. Fear that wanting her was the most dangerous thing of all. The first sign was the car. Not the black sedan from before. This one was flashier. A cherry-red muscle car with dark-tinted windows and chrome wheels that didn't belong on Maple Hollow's salt-crusted roads. It pulled into the diner's lot late on a Thursday afternoon, just as the sky started bleeding into dusk. Jenna saw it from the kitchen window. Her hand paused mid-scrub in the sink, something twisted in her chest, tight, sharp, instinctive. He stepped out like he owned the place. Tyler, same cocky swagger, same clean leather jacket, same easy smile that once fooled everyone but her. He looked good in the way men like him always do when they're about to ruin something, put together, smug and just unpredictable enough to be dangerous. She didn't breathe until he opened the door to the diner, and that smile spread across his face like poison. "Wow," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "You've been hiding out in this charming little hole?" Bonnie froze mid-pour. Tom looked up from the register, brows pulling together. No one knew who he was, but they felt the shift immediately. Tension snapped through the air like static. Jenna walked out of the kitchen slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel, heart pounding so hard she thought it might split her ribs. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice flat. Tyler spread his arms like he was offering her a gift. "Heard you'd been playing house in some snow-covered town. Thought I'd drop in. See my son." Max. The name alone made her blood run cold. "You're not seeing him," she said quickly, firmly. Tyler stepped closer. Not enough for a scene, just enough for her to smell the cologne she remembered too well. "You don't get to decide that anymore, Jenna. We both know what you took." She didn't back up, didn't blink, but every nerve screamed. Then, from the kitchen door, Eli appeared. No words, no threat, just that heavy, still presence, eyes locked on Tyler like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Tyler glanced at him, smiled. "Friend of yours?" Eli didn't smile back. Jenna looked at Tyler and realized something terrifying. He hadn't come to beg. He'd come to claim. And Tyler didn't leave quietly. The door slammed behind Tyler with a finality that made the windows rattle. Inside, the diner slowly exhaled, murmurs picking back up, as the customers returned to their half-eaten sandwiches and bottomless mugs of coffee. But Jenna didn't move. She was frozen behind the counter, hands clenched around the edge, her breath shallow. Eli followed him out. No fanfare, no raised voice, just the door swinging gently shut behind him, the bell overhead jingling like it had no idea what kind of storm it was announcing. Outside, the cold bit hard. Snow still clung to the curb, dirty and melting, and Tyler leaned against his car like he was waiting for applause. His smirk faded just a little when he saw Eli coming toward him, not rushed, not tense, just walking, calm as ever. "You're the guy, huh?" Tyler said, cocking his head. "The one playing bodyguard. Cute." Eli stopped a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets. "You've had your moment. Now you're going to get in your car, and you're not going to come back." Tyler barked a laugh. "You think I'm scared of some washed-up kitchen grunt?" Eli's gaze didn't waver. "No, I think you're too arrogant to be scared of the right things." That made Tyler pause. Eli took a small step forward, just enough to change the air between them. "I've seen what real violence looks like, Tyler. What it does, what it leaves behind. So I don't make threats. I don't raise my voice. I don't throw punches just to prove I can." His voice was calm, even, too steady to be anything but true. But if you come near Jenna again, if you get anywhere close to Max, I won't ask twice. I won't warn you again. You won't see me coming." Tyler's face tightened. His hands twitched like he wanted to laugh but couldn't find the breath. "You threatening me?" "No," Eli said simply. "I'm promising you something." For a long stretched moment they stood like that. Two men, one pretending not to be rattled, the other too steady to fake anything. Tyler broke first. He scoffed, climbed into his car, and peeled out of the lot without another word. Eli stood there a moment longer, letting the cold air cool the tension in his veins. He didn't look back at the diner. He didn't have to. He knew she'd be watching. The snow had started to melt, leaving behind puddles and slush that soaked through boots and stained the hems of jeans. The town looked softer in the thaw, less like a place to hide, more like a place to be. Jenna stood on the diner's back steps, arms folded, breath curling into the crisp air. Inside, the late lunch crowd was thinning. Bonnie hummed off-key while wiping down tables. Tom was grumbling about the coffee machine again. It was normal, almost peaceful. Eli came out behind her, stepping quietly, like always. She didn't turn around, just said, "He'll come back, won't he?" There was a pause before Eli replied, "Probably, but he won't get far." She nodded, but her throat tightened. "I used to think leaving was the hardest part," she said. "Packing Max up in the middle of the night, sleeping in the car, taking whatever job I could find. But it's not. The hardest part is realizing that even after all that, he can still find us. He still thinks we're his." "You're not," Eli said. "I know." She swallowed. "But knowing it and feeling safe, they're different." Eli moved closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him at her side. "I've spent so long running, Eli, changing towns, changing my name at one point. Max doesn't even remember what normal feels like." "You do," he said quietly. "You're building it, whether you believe it or not." She looked at him then, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but something else too. Resolve. "I don't want to run anymore. I want Max to have a place he remembers for the right reasons. I want to stop surviving and start living." The words felt heavier than they should have, like saying them aloud made the possibility real. Eli's jaw flexed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then stop running," he said. "You're not alone. Not anymore." For the first time in years, she let herself believe it. Really believe it. That maybe she didn't have to do everything on her own. That maybe home wasn't just a place, it was a decision. And standing beside Eli with the wind soft against her cheeks and hope settling deep in her chest, Jenna made hers. It happened just after midnight. Jenna had fallen asleep on the couch, curled under a quilt with Max's favorite book still open beside her. The apartment was quiet, the kind of stillness that only came after a long day of pretending everything was finally okay. Then the sound shattered it. Glass exploded from the back of the apartment, a sharp, violent crack that sliced through the silence like a scream. She bolted upright, heart pounding, breath caught in her throat. For a split second, she couldn't move. Then instinct took over. "Max," she whispered, already running. His bedroom door was open. The cold hit her first, sharp and immediate, pouring in through the shattered window like a wave. The glass was everywhere, on the floor, the blankets, the old rug beside the bed. Max was huddled beneath his covers, shaking, wide-eyed, but unhurt. "I'm okay," he whispered, before she could ask. Then came the footsteps, steady, fast, purposeful. Eli burst through the front door, barefoot, shirt thrown over one shoulder, breath misting in the frigid air. He had heard it too. He always listened. "What happened?" he demanded, already scanning the room, eyes flicking to the broken glass, then to Max, then back toward the window. "Someone threw something," Jenna said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if they were trying to break in or just scare us." Eli crouched by the window, careful not to step on the glass, every movement controlled. He picked up the object, a brick wrapped in a greasy rag. No note, no message, just a warning. Jenna stood in the doorway, arms wrapped tightly around herself, every inch of progress she'd made unraveling thread by thread. "He found us again." Eli stood slowly. His voice was low. "I don't think he ever really left." Her knees almost buckled. "What do we do?" "We make this the last time he gets this close." There was no bravado in his tone, no anger, just that terrifying calm that Jenna was learning to recognize. Not fear, not panic, but a man slipping into a version of himself built for moments exactly like this. And suddenly the question wasn't if Eli could protect them. It was how far he'd go to make sure no one ever hurt them again. The morning after the window shattered, Eli didn't show up at the diner. He was always there, early, quiet, already prepping before anyone else arrived. But today, the grill stayed cold. The back door didn't creak open. The kitchen felt wrong without him, like something vital had been removed and no one had told the rest of the world. Jenna knew why. She just didn't know how far he was going. By noon, Eli was sitting in the corner booth of a truck stop cafe just outside of town, nursing a bitter coffee and watching the snow melt in slow drips from the gutters. Across from him sat a man with a military haircut and a crooked nose, someone you wouldn't notice unless you knew exactly what to look for. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again," the man said, stirring sugar into his cup without looking up. "Thought you were done." "I am," Eli replied, "but I need a favor." The man raised an eyebrow. "Does this favor come with names?" "One," Eli said, sliding a folded paper across the table. "Tyler Maddox, Jenna Brooks's ex. He's here. He's threatening her kid. Broke a window last night to send a message." The man looked at the paper but didn't open it. "You want him gone?" "I want him watched, disarmed. I want his options cut off before he does something we can't walk back from. If he breathes the wrong direction near that apartment again, I need to know about it first." The man leaned back, eyeing Eli for a long moment. "You're not asking me to disappear him, not like before." "No," Eli said, voice hard. "That's not who I am anymore. But if he crosses the line again—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The man nodded slowly. "Consider it handled. You'll get updates. Quiet ones." Eli stood, left enough cash to cover the coffee and the man's silence. As he walked out, the cold wind hit his face like a second warning. But he felt clearer now, sharper, because there were men like Tyler in the world, entitled, cruel, reckless. And then there were men like Eli, built to keep the worst of them from doing real harm. He was done hiding. And Tyler Maddox had just run out of second chances. It happened late one night after closing. The diner was dark except for the dim glow of the emergency light above the back door. The rain tapped gently against the windows, soft and steady, like the world was holding its breath. Jenna stood in the pantry, the smell of flour and coffee lingering in the air. She hadn't meant to look for it, but there it was, pushed into the corner behind a stack of unused baking trays, the metal box. See. She hadn't touched it since the first time, but tonight, something pulled her toward it. Maybe it was the broken window. Maybe it was the way Eli hadn't flinched when she told him she was scared. Or maybe it was how he looked at Max now, with something like silent promise in his eyes. She sat on the pantry floor and pulled the box toward her. To her surprise, it wasn't locked anymore. The clasp clicked open with barely any resistance. Inside were folders, thin worn, labeled in sharp handwriting. Tyler Maddox was at the top, but beneath that were others, names she didn't recognize, places, notes, faces, some paper-clipped to briefcase summaries, others marked with red slashes. She skimmed the first one, a man with a long criminal record, domestic abuse, drug trafficking. The next, a name scrawled across the top, followed by a detailed breakdown of a missing persons case and a timeline of when Eli had last seen the target. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't even vigilante justice. It was order. a ledger of the world's failures that Eli had quietly carried long after the war was over, a list of people no one else had stopped, and that he, in his own way, had made sure would never hurt someone again. She closed the box carefully, her fingers trembling. Eli was more than a protector. He was a man who never stopped repaying a debt. To Caleb, to the people he couldn't save, to the part of himself that refused to stand by. When she found him outside, standing beneath the overhang watching the rain, she held the box out to him without a word. He looked at it, then at her. "You opened it," he said softly. "I had to," she replied. "I needed to understand." "And do you?" She stepped closer. "I do now." He didn't apologize, and she didn't ask him to. It happened quietly. No sirens, no headlines. Just a shift in the air, subtle, certain, final. Tyler Maddox was gone. One day he was in town, loitering outside the diner in his red muscle car, flashing that smug smile like nothing could touch him. The next day the car was gone. The motel room he'd been staying in was left neat and stripped, the key tossed on the front desk counter. No note, no bags, just gone. Jenna found out from Bonnie, who leaned over the counter with wide eyes and a whisper. "Creepy guy with the Camaro, packed up and disappeared overnight. Didn't even pay the bill." Jenna just nodded. "Strange," she said. But it didn't feel strange, not to her. That night, she walked out onto the apartment balcony, the wind soft against her skin, the sky a canvas of heavy clouds. Eli was already there, sitting in one of the old plastic chairs with a mug in his hands, steam curling from it into the night. She sat beside him. "Tyler's gone," she said, not a question, not even a statement, just truth. Eli didn't react. He just took a slow sip of his drink and watched the dark horizon. "No police came by," she added. "No one's looking for him." Still, he said nothing. She looked at him then, studying the calm set of his face, the way he carried silence like armor and apology all at once. "You made it so he wouldn't come back," she said. "Didn't you?" He turned to her, his voice soft. "I made sure he understood the cost of trying again." She didn't ask for details. She didn't want them, because in that moment she realized something she hadn't fully let herself believe until now. She trusted him, not just to protect her, but to choose restraint over revenge, justice over chaos. And if there was a part of her that once feared what Eli was capable of, it was gone now. "He's not coming back," she whispered. "No," Eli said. "He's not." She let out a slow breath, the tightness in her chest loosening for the first time in what felt like years. It wasn't peace, not entirely, but it was the beginning of it, and that was enough. Spring arrived in Maple Hollow like a held breath finally released, slow, steady, gentle. The snow melted into the earth, and green things started to push through again. For the first time in a long time, the world didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. The diner was busier now. Jenna worked weekday mornings behind the counter, knowing every regular by name, every coffee order by heart. Eli ran the kitchen like he always had, silent, steady, exact. But something about the place had changed. There was laughter now, music humming low through the speakers. Customers lingered longer. The kind of place people came to feel like they belonged. At night they went home together, all three of them. Their apartment had new curtains. A second-hand couch Eli insisted on fixing. Max's drawings lined the fridge, and a plant Jenna managed to keep alive sat on the windowsill, bent, a little uneven, but reaching for the light. Max had flour in his hair most afternoons now. He liked helping Eli bake, even if most of the help ended with more mess than muffins. But Eli never minded. He taught Max how to crack eggs one-handed, how to hold a whisk properly. He spoke to him like an equal, like someone worth listening to. And Max listened back. That morning, Jenna had just finished wiping down a booth when Max walked in from the back, his little sneakers thudding against the tile. He looked at Eli, who was kneeling beside the oven, checking a tray of biscuits. "Hey, Dad," Max said casually, like it was the most normal word in the world. Eli froze just for a beat. Jenna looked up, heart in her throat. Eli turned, his voice soft. "Yeah, buddy?" Max grinned. "Are they done yet?" Eli smiled back. "Just about." Jenna had to turn away for a second, blinking fast. That single word, Dad, echoed through the air like a bell, clear and full, and so much more than she ever thought they'd have. Later, when the diner was quiet and the town outside glowed gold in the early evening light, Jenna stood beside Eli, their shoulders touching, hearts unburdened. They didn't speak. They didn't need to, because they had made it through the dark. And they were finally, irrevocably, home,